The Detroit Lions traveled to the desert last weekend to face the 1-1 Arizona Cardinals in a matchup that saw both teams looking to improve to 2-1 on their NFL season. Now, while the Detroit Lions were able to escape with a narrow victory over the Cardinals, they were not able to escape unscathed as they leave this game with multiple key injuries to starters, role players, and several major contributors to this offense and defense, and these contributors will miss significant time. These are injuries that will affect the Detroit Lions season as a whole, and especially with the tough schedule they have coming up versus Seattle, versus Dallas, and versus Minnesota. These are players that are going to leave a massive gap at their position and that the Detroit Lions are going to need to replace. So today, we're going to take a look at those injuries, take a look at the injury updates, the time frame, and how the Detroit Lions are going to have to go about replacing these players for the time being until they are able to return. So, with that being said, let's start off with arguably the biggest and most impactful injury, that being Frank Ragnow, who last weekend recorded a 99.9 Pro Football Focus grade. That is the highest grade possible at any position, at any player. He is arguably the best center in the NFL as an elite run blocker and an elite pass blocker, and he is one of the toughest players in the NFL, fighting through multiple injuries throughout his NFL career, and if at all possible, not missing time on the field. Now, Frank Ragnow does have an injury history. He partially tore his pec in Week 3 versus Arizona and expected to be a week-to-week type of player. He is questionable to start against the Seattle Seahawks and will potentially miss a couple of weeks. Now, the silver lining to this is that the Detroit Lions have a bye week in Week 5. They play the Seattle Seahawks here in Week 4, and then next week they have completely off. They do not play football, which will leave the Detroit Lions and Frank Ragnow a lot of time to recover to potentially return for their matchup in Dallas in Week 6. It is yet to be seen whether or not Frank Ragnow will miss time. There is certainly a possibility of it, and I would say even a likelihood that Frank Ragnow misses a game or 2 weeks at this point with a partially torn pectoral muscle. This is a injury, obviously more severe with C.J. Gardner-Johnson last year, but it kept C.J. Gardner-Johnson out for 13 weeks. Now, he fully tore his pectoral and, of course, was pretty quick to come back from that injury. But Frank Ragnow is probably going to miss at least 1, if not 2 games for the Detroit Lions, and this is a major loss. Now, as I previously mentioned, Frank Ragnow has an injury history. In 2020, he played through a fractured throat. In 2021, he played through multiple groin injuries. In 2022, had calf and back injuries. And then last year, especially towards the end of the season, suffered through knee injuries, ankle injuries, and all other sorts of ailments. Now, despite those injuries, Frank Ragnow has been an Iron Man for the Detroit Lions. In 2020, he played 15 games after fracturing his throat and played every single snap of every single game in that time span. In 2022, he played in 16 of the 17 games. In 2023, played in 15 of the 17 games. And the only time throughout his career that he has missed more than 2 games in a season was 2021, as he suffered with that groin injury and he played just 4 games for the Detroit Lions. Now, Frank Ragnow, if at all possible, is going to play. If at all possible, will find time and will play for the Detroit Lions as their starting center. But until he does return, because again, I think the Lions are expecting to be without him this week, the Lions still have a very strong offensive line. Graham Glasgow will likely slide in as the center. He was the backup center last year when Frank Ragnow missed time versus Las Vegas. And I do think that he is going to be the player to replace Frank Ragnow this season. With that being said, I believe Coyote Awasika will slide in as the left guard, which a lot of people seem very upset about, but I'm not too worried. Awasika started the NFC Championship game a season ago versus the San Francisco 49ers, started against the Las Vegas Raiders, as well as a couple of other games throughout 2023, and played very well. He played over 250 snaps on the offensive line for the Detroit Lions, allowed just 1 sack and 2 penalties in that time. And I think if we have to rely on him for a week or two versus the Seattle Seahawks and even versus the Dallas Cowboys in the run game, I do think that Owasika will be good enough to keep the Detroit Lions on schedule. I don't think he'll be a liability within that offensive line, and I think it will give Ragnow significant time and sufficient time to heal up in return as the Detroit Lions center. Now, another interesting potential move the Detroit Lions could do is Colby Sorsdale could potentially move over to the left side of that offensive line, played every single offensive line position with the exception of center in the preseason and throughout training camp. Or if they really believe in their rookie offensive line, they could potentially kick Giovanni Manu inside to play the left guard position, a position he has not played before, but with his ability, with his size and his run blocking ability, it is an interesting concept to say maybe they do throw him in there and see if he can hold up at the NFL level, get him a couple of NFL reps, and if nothing else, know that you have a very big, very athletic, and very devastating run blocker to run behind next to Taylor Decker. Now, the next players we're going to talk about are a little bit lighter on the injury concerns, right? These are guys that are considered day-to-day, very well could play versus Seattle, but could potentially miss a week into the bye with their injuries and ailments that they acquired. Now, Brian Branch is officially in concussion protocol. He left the game early versus Arizona after taking a blow to the head. And again, much like concussion protocol tends to be, like with Alex Anzalone a week ago, there's a chance that he does play with the team. There's a chance that he does suit up and he does play, and there's a chance that he does not. It just really depends on how severe the concussion was, how quickly Brian Branch is throughout his recovery process. And those are things that we as fans and as the media just simply don't know, right? We're not in the room. We're not with the doctors. We don't know the severity of the concussion that Brian Branch suffered, but we have seen players that have returned within days, and we have seen players that have returned after a week or two. Tua Tagovailoa, it was put on injury reserve after his most recent concussion. So they're just injuries that we don't know about. There is about a 50-50 chance that he plays versus Seattle and about a 50-50 chance that he does not. Same thing goes with Alex Anzalone. He is still suffering through concussion protocol, traveled with the team to Arizona last weekend, which I think was very interesting considering he did not play. Very well could have been there for a leadership role, but also I think was a very fringe player in that Arizona game. Was a player that came right down to the wire, right down to, game time decisions, and unfortunately was not able to play. However, after another entire week, and even a long week at that, not playing until Monday night, I think Alex Anzalone is likely to play, which is a massive upgrade considering the Lions had another blow at linebacker this weekend. Now, Aleem McNeil and Sam Laporta are both players that are considered day-to-day as well. Aleem McNeil left the game with a shoulder injury, while Sam Laporta left the game with a low ankle sprain. Both of these players have played through similar injuries before, and I do expect that both of them will be available and limited in practice this week, with being available on Monday night as they prepare for Seattle. But again, these are day-to-day players. All four of them could play, and all four of them very well could not play. The Lions very well may be without three of their defensive starters and a massive weapon at tight end on the offense. Now, unfortunately, the injuries do not end there, as Marcus Davenport suffered an elbow injury in Week 3, and it is likely season-ending. He missed Week 2 with a, I believe, ankle or groin injury, something in the lower body. Did play in Weeks 1 and 3 and was very good. He had two games throughout his NFL season this year. 2 tackles, 4 quarterback hits, half a sack, and 6 pressures. But unfortunately, it seems that his season has come to an end, and the Detroit Lions are still on the hunt for that edge rusher too. Now, I think the Lions will replace Levi in a very interesting way. I think Levi Onwuzurike will play a little bit of edge, as will Josh Paschal. These will be the 2 players that see the most increase in playing time in the absence of Marcus Davenport. However, Levi Onwuzurike, of course, is a defensive tackle at heart. He is an interior pass rusher, and Josh Paschal really isn't a pass rusher either. I think he'll be the guy that primarily replaces Marcus Davenport on the early downs, on the rushing downs, and I think that Josh Paschal does have some pass rushing upside, but I think that James Houston will also see an increase in playing time, right? Yes, he is a one-dimensional pass rusher. Yes, he is only going to play on third and long situations. He is probably only going to play 5 to 10 snaps a game, but I do think he will see an increased playing time in the absence of Marcus Davenport. In the one game that Davenport missed this season, James Houston was active in that game, and he only played 3 reps on the defensive line, only played 3 reps with the Detroit Lions that day. But I think with the longer term absence, the Lions can start planning around James Houston a little better, potentially using him a little bit more. And I think he can make up for the pass rushing absence. I think Josh Paschal and Levi Onwuzurike can make up for the run block or run stopping aspects. And I do think that potentially you might even see Isaac Ukwu elevated from this roster as the Detroit Lions look to get back a pass rusher that they have been very sorely lacking. With that being said, I still think the Lions defensive line will be good to go. I still think the run defense will be elite. I still think the pass rush will be much improved. But of course, losing your $10 million free agent for the season is not what the Detroit Lions were hoping for. And then Derek Barnes, the Detroit Lions starting Sam linebacker, suffered a knee injury in week 3 and was placed on injury reserve, missing a minimum of 4 weeks for the Detroit Lions. Now, Derek Barnes was a leader on this defense. He was a player that was playing some of the best football of his career, was playing some of the best leadership role of his career, and was playing really good football, right? The game-winning interception against Tampa Bay a couple of months ago, right, to send the Lions to the NFC Championship game is the game and the play that Barnes is most known for, but he's been playing really good football for well over a year at this point, a very underrated linebacker and underrated playmaker in the Lions linebacking core. And unfortunately, he will miss at least the next month of football after being placed on injury reserves. Now, I think Jalen Reeves-Maybin, Malcolm Rodriguez, and even Benjamin Neiman could potentially put in some reps to replace him. Of course, Alex Anzalone coming back will cushion that blow a little bit, but of course, losing your starting Sam linebacker is always going to hurt. I do think that while Malcolm Rodriguez is very capable and Jalen Reeves-Maybin is very good, unfortunately, I don't think they will be nearly as productive or efficient as Derek Barnes in that role. And that will be a massive blow for the Detroit Lions from a leadership standpoint, an energy standpoint, and of course, a playmaking standpoint for the next 4 weeks. But with all that being said, that is all we have for the injury report. And I know saying all is a lot considering that 7 players that might miss this week as well as multiple others. But I do think there is some hope. I do think for the day-to-day guys, there's a good chance that most of them end up playing. I do think that when it comes to Marcus Davenport, there is some viable options for replacement. And of course, with Frank Ragnow, there is a lot of quality depth on that offensive line. I think Derek Barnes is the one player the Lions are really going to struggle to replace the production of in the role of. But I think the Lions, even then, have good replacements with Jalen Reeves-Maybin and Malcolm Rodriguez. Maybe not as good, maybe not as impactful, but players that you can certainly rely on to start, players that you can certainly rely on to make plays, and certainly rely upon to, at the very least, not be a liability for the Detroit Lions defense. But with all of that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Let me know your opinions down in the comments below on these injuries, on how the Detroit Lions should replace them, and how concerned you are about any of these players that we've talked about today. Be very curious to hear your guys' side of the story. But with that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have yet to subscribe to the channel, please go down below and do so. It helps the channel out a ton and tells the algorithm that you really enjoy the videos. But with that being said, thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.